Good morning. My name's Adam, and we're here today for your Discovery at Home environmental observation program titled Through the Seasons. In this program, you will analyze seasonal changes in the environment using observations of animal behavior to gather information. You'll go on to communicate some of what you've learned by making a do-it-yourself bird feeder. There's something I find rather curious about today's program. Ultimately, our space and physics specialist, Jepna, will show you how to make your own bird feeders. Why do you think we selected an astronomer who specializes in stellar dynamics and the evolution of stars to talk to you about animal behavior and bird watching? Do you know what the connection might be yet? Well, I don't want to steal Jepna's thunder, so while we're waiting for a few more people to join our stream, let's just talk about our perception of the seasons for a few minutes. In an honest bit of serendipity, a bit of unplanned luck, we're bringing our Through the Seasons program to you 2 days before the Northern Hemisphere summer solstice this Saturday, June the 20th. Have you heard of the solstice before? Our summer solstice occurs when planet Earth's North Pole reaches its maximum tilt towards the sun. Down here on the surface, we can observe this as being the day when the sun reaches its highest point in the sky and gives us the longest day of the year. Have you noticed the days getting longer and the sun getting later in the evening since the winter? I still remember when I was younger and I had to go to bed when it was still quite bright out this time of the year. The summer solstice is also known in many cultures as midsummer and is often associated with celebrations and ceremony. Here in Canada, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador celebrates St. John's Day around the solstice, and La Belle Province, Quebec, marks their Fête Nationale, Saint-Jean-Baptiste. I don't know about you, but the end of June doesn't feel like the middle of summer to me. We've only had, 2 stretches of hot weather so far? And I'd say that we're almost 2 months ahead of the best ocean swimming in late August. But starting from this Sunday, it's all downhill towards winter in terms of day length. In our part of the world, here in the Maritimes, the temperature of our seasons seems to lag well behind the day length. We reach our highest ocean temperatures 2 months after the solstice, and have to be careful not to get sunburnt while spring skiing in March. I always have to remind myself on cold, clear days in April to be sun safe. The end of April has the same solar intensity, the UV index, and therefore sunburn risk as late August. So I might be putting on both sunscreen and a heavy jacket. Our experience with delayed seasonal temperatures was something interesting to compare with my Irish fiance. If we took the 12 months of the year and divided them up between 4 seasons, we'd have 3 months in each season. To me, a 3-month summer would be June, July, and August. But to her, summer back in Ireland is May, June, and July, with August marking the start of autumn. We have an even funnier disagreement about the end of winter and the start of spring. If I had to choose 3 months for winter, and 3 months is probably rounding down a bit, I'd have to say December, January, and February. March would optimistically be the start of spring. In the Irish calendar, winter is November, December, and January, with February 1st marking the first day of spring. According to Environment Canada, the last of the sea ice in the Northumberland Strait and around Cape Breton doesn't normally melt until mid-April. Funnily enough, her first experience in Canada's winter was in 2015. And if you guys are in grade 1, you probably don't remember too much about 2015, but your parents and some older audience might. That was a very snowy winter. So her welcome to Canada's winter was February 1st, 2015, which should have been the first day of spring to her. But we had meter-high piles of snow and ice everywhere. It was a very wintry winter. So she said, "It's treacherous out there. I'm not walking around. I'm just going to wait till it melts." And I says to her, "Katie, that could be April." So she held out for about a week and realized, yeah, it's not melting. She's going to have to get used to it. And she's been getting more and more used to it. We finally got her skiing and skating, and she's understood that we get much more winter. The Irish calendar centers summer around the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, and centers winter around the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. Ireland is quite a bit further north than we are, so their summer days are a good bit longer than ours, and their winter days much shorter. However, I joke that they get to rob a bunch of our heat from the Gulf Stream and the North Atlantic Current, carrying warm water across the ocean. This makes their year-round temperature much more stable than ours. It seems to me that the seasons in Ireland are determined more by the day length, while I think about ours more in terms of the temperature, with the ocean around us hanging on to the heat into the fall and taking a long time to warm up in the spring. I have my Irelandopedia book right here, and I was looking at it just before. And when I go to the table of contents, there's all these entries for the different counties, and there's one for weather. I said, great, I wonder what's on the weather page to show you. And it looks like it's a little bit of a joke put in at the end, because this is the entire entry for weather, just a bunch of rain. But now, let's bring it back to the Maritimes and get you set up with your activity for today. To anyone who's joined since the start of our stream, welcome to Discovery at Home. My name is Adam, and I'm with you today for the Environmental Observation Program Through the Seasons. In this program, you will analyze seasonal changes in the environment using observations of animal behavior to gather information. You'll go on to communicate some of what you've learned by making your own bird feeder. We hope you'll show us what you've made and observed on Flipgrid and on our social media pages. Your Discovery Center tag submission will also count as an entry for our Show Us Your Science contest, where you'll be entered to win a Science at Home prize pack. But first, I'll hand things over to our space specialist, Jepna, to talk to you about birds.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the workshop Through the Seasons. My name is Jepna. I'm a Dome Theater presenter here at the Discovery Center. In today's workshop, we will explore the 4 seasons and their effect on living things. By using our own bird feeders and doing some bird watching, we will discover how the types of birds we find around us are affected by the seasons. Our seasons depend on 2 things: where the Earth is as it orbits the sun and the Earth's tilt. The planet that we live on is a big spinning ball out in space that orbits or moves around the sun. Imagine the Earth like a runner making laps around the sun, and each time the Earth makes a full lap, crosses that finish line, we celebrate a new year. As the Earth moves, we can be tilted towards or away from the sun. This determines our season, how much light and heat we get from the sun, and what kind of weather we can expect during that time. Have you noticed how some months of the year, like January and February, are usually cold and snowy, while other months, like July and August, are hot and sunny? This is that yearly cycle or pattern that we call the seasons. I have a few things in front of me here. Do you think you could match them to the season that they're supposed to represent? Spring, summer, fall, or winter? We have a snowman, a squishy pumpkin, some sunscreen and a big sun hat, and some yellow flowers. I'll give you a moment to match them up. Have you got it? All right, let's start. If you looked at the yellow flowers and thought, spring, you are exactly right. Once the snow melts away in the spring, plants begin to sprout and flowers bloom once again. While sunscreen is important all year round, the sun hat and sunscreen together make me think of going to the beach. So they represent the summer, our hottest season, with longer days and more hours of sunlight. The orange pumpkin represents the cooler months of fall, delicious pumpkin pie, and the leaves on some trees changing color. What about the snowman? Of course, it is winter, the coldest season with shorter days and less sunlight, when we can sit by a cozy fireplace with a nice cup of hot cocoa. So by observing how the environment around us changes and how living things like plants and animals act, we can connect what we see, hear, smell, feel, maybe even taste, to the changing seasons and the time of year. In the spring, we see new animals born, while in the fall, We feel that chill in the air and watch how animals prepare for the winter. Some animals will try to eat as much as they can to put on more weight. This extra weight helps them to stay warm once winter comes. The full moon at this time in the fall, when animals are gaining extra fat, is called Wigewigus in the Mi'kmaq language, or animal fattening moon. What other ways have you noticed animals or plants changing with the seasons? Another way that an animal can prepare for the winter is through migration, moving from one place to another. Some birds migrate and spend their winters in a different part of the world, where it is warmer and there's more food for them. Think about the birds that you've seen around you. Do you see the same birds all year round, or did you notice that they can change with the seasons? Birds like black-capped chickadees actually don't migrate, but stay in Nova Scotia throughout the year. Have you seen a chickadee before? Chickadees eat insects, seeds, and small fruits, which they also gather and store throughout the warmer months. In the Mi'kmaq language, the chickadee is known as jigiges, famous for living in family groups and being very chatty, calling out chickadee-dee-dee or jiggy-gay-gay-gay. Do you know or can you find the Mi'kmaq names for any other birds? Two common birds that live in Nova Scotia for most of the year, but do migrate before winter, are the American robin and the yellow warbler. American robins, or jeepjoej, have red chests, dark gray backs, and yellow bills. They usually leave Nova Scotia in the fall and travel south as far as Mexico. They return to Nova Scotia in late March, once it is spring. Yellow warblers are bright yellow birds that feed on insects and seeds. During the fall, they also travel south, ending up in Mexico too, or they can even go as far as Peru. Have you seen a yellow warbler or American robin before? Maybe you've heard them. This is the song of a yellow warbler. The warbler's sweet whistled notes are common sounds to hear in the spring and early summer mornings. Now, I'm going to play the American robin song, and if you listen closely, you can even hear a chickadee very quietly in the background, just towards the end of the recording. Listen close. Could you tell the differences between the sounds of the robin, the warbler, and even the chickadee? In this workshop, we are going to act like ornithologists. This might seem like a long, complicated word, but an ornithologist is just someone who studies birds. We will study and observe how the seasons affect the birds that we see around us. And to help us with this, we will make our own bird feeders. I will show you two types of bird feeders, and you can choose which one you'd like to make. One made with a citrus fruit peel, like an orange or lemon, and one made with a pine cone or a toilet paper roll. You'll also need a pair of scissors, some twine or string, smooth peanut butter, not crunchy, or sunflower butter, and some food for the birds. Different food can attract different birds, so think about the types of birds that you've seen near you. Are you hoping to attract those birds or any others? For example, black oil sunflower seeds can attract chickadees, while soft fruits like apples or berries can attract robins and blackbirds. I have a mix here that includes nuts, seeds, and dried fruit. When choosing your food, also think about what other animals may be around and could end up eating from your feeder. Make sure that any food you use is safe for these animals too, and remember to remove any food if it gets wet or spoiled. Make a new feeder if you need to. For the fruit bowl feeder, ask a grown-up to cut your orange roughly in half, and then scoop out the insides, which you can have later as a tasty snack. Once you have a hollow peel that looks like a bowl, you can pat the inside dry and, using a pencil, poke through the rind to make 4 evenly spaced holes, just like that. Be careful not to place these holes too close to the rim, or your feeder might not be able to hold too much weight and it could break. You can use pieces of twine or string to make long handles for your bowl so that you can hang it up like this. And then all you need to do is fill your feeder with some food. Just like that. To keep seeds or grains from spilling out easily, mix them with sticky peanut or sunflower butter. Our second type of feeder is faster to make, but just as messy. You can use either a toilet paper roll or a kitchen roll, or a conifer cone, like a pine or spruce cone. Smaller seeds and grains will work better for this kind of feeder. Tie a string or twine around your pine cone or through your roll so that it hangs. Spread peanut or sunflower butter all over the pine cone or roll using a butter knife, a popsicle stick, and even your hands. Then cover your sticky feeder with bird seeds and hang it up. Simple as that. You could even slide the roll along a branch and not use twine at all. If you are using a birdseed mix, remember to wash your hands after. Next, think about where you will hang up your feeder. Is the location that you've chosen sheltered from the weather? How do you think different types of weather like rain, snow, or wind could affect your feeder? Which do you think is the best season to put out a feeder? How could bird feeders be helpful? To help you with your bird watching, use the bird watching guide for the right season: spring, summer, fall, or winter. Can you match the birds you spot with the pictures in the guide? You can also use the bird watching guide on its own whenever you're on a walk outside. Use a bird watching report, like this one, to then write down, keep track of, and share which birds you find. Check off what season it is, write down what day you observed the birds, and even where you saw them. Fill out their names or the types of birds here, and then describe your observations. What did the birds look like? You could even draw them. Listen to the birds. What do they sound like? Keep a tally or count of how many birds have visited your feeder. Do you think that the weather on any day affected how many birds you saw? As you watch your feeder and the birds over time, think about which birds you expect to see in each season. How do you think the types of birds and the number of birds you can see would change with the seasons? Before I say goodbye and let you get to work on your feeder, I'd like to leave you with a few more things to think about. If you have a bird feeding station made from plastic, metal, or wood, do remember to clean it regularly. Why do you think we wouldn't want to keep a dirty feeder up? How do you think you could attract different birds? Make another feeder and try using a different type of food in it. Think about what other animals migrate. Is it just birds? Finally, think about how humans behave differently with the changing seasons. How do the seasons affect us and how we live? How do we react to the different seasons? Do we wear different clothes or make changes to our homes or shelters? Now it's your turn to spread your wings, my friends. Have fun making your bird feeders and studying the incredible birds that are around you. Like a good ornithologist, note down their different colors, sizes, sounds, and even their cheeky personalities. Reflect on the lives of these birds as they react to the changing seasons, and share those interesting observations you've made with those around you, your family, your friends, your teacher, and even us here at the Discovery Center. I cannot wait to see your bird watching missions take flight. This is Jepna signing off, wishing you all the best, sharp eyes, and clear skies.
Thanks a lot, Jepna. Looks yummy. I'm only half joking with the looks yummy because, you know, the nut butter and then nice kind of granola looking things on top does kind of look yummy. But if you're using food that's sold as birdseed, it might not be guaranteed to be for human consumption. So I don't suggest you eat your bird feeder. If it does look really yummy, make a human-safe version and have your own snack. If you've tuned in after 10 and missed my intro, or Jepna's information on seasonal changes and making observations at your own bird feeder, you can rewind and watch now or later. Doing so now might help you complete today's activity. You can also find the learning guide with suggested supplies on the Discovery at Home webpage. It's a big learning guide this week with the addition of the 8-page identification guide for bird identification guide for Nova Scotia. Now it's your turn. Reflect on the information from Jepna and think about how you want to make your bird feeder, where you want to put it, and what sort of birds you're hoping to attract and support. I'll be able to watch for submissions to feature after the break until 5 minutes before we're back live at 11. Please don't feel limited to only submitting your homemade bird feeders. I'd be very happy to see other bird feeders, your existing bird watching experiences, or other examples of seasonal changes. And remember, you can show us your science on Flipgrid, Twitter, and Facebook to be entered to win a Science at Home prize pack. If you have questions, please reach out to us on the Discovery at Home page. Myself and our team of educators will be here to help you. Then tune back in at 11 so we can see each other's bird feeders and talk about seasonal experiences. If you want to get right to making your feeder, go for it. You'll have plenty of time. I'm going to hang around for a few minutes to check in on our biospheres on our day 28 mark. Either way, I hope to see you back at 11. I'm going to bring you over to my laptop here and show you a bit of the history of our biospheres. This was exactly 4 weeks ago today when the 4 were planted. On the 2 on the left are from Ruth. The very far left is from a kind of wild woods area, and the next one is from her backyard. It was a bit of a muddier, more human interacted sample. The big tall one is mine with the grass and rose, and on the far right is Jen's. Let's have another look at them a week later. One of the biggest observations I noted was evidence of the water cycle at this point, because you see all the condensation on the inside, indicating that in this closed system, the water's been evaporating, condensing, and dripping back down to make a little miniature water cycle. Here's a little closer look at them so you can really see the condensation there. It gets kind of difficult to look at some of what's inside because of all that condensation. Here's now day 14, and if we're looking at some of the biotic factors, some of the living things, have a look at my big one there. The grass has got so jungly that it's all up top and starting to bend down. The rose looks much bigger, and everything else looks pretty happy to me. Now, I brought these up, 2 weeks ago, I think. So if you've seen the other Thursday Discovery at Homes for the past few weeks, you should have seen these ones. The next one you haven't seen yet. Jill took these for me last week. Let's have a look. There's a little fly through of them at day 21, the 3-week mark. What observations can you make here? Do you see anything that's changed with the biotic factors, with the living organisms, the plants? Let's have a little closer look here. And mine is still looking pretty big and jungly. It's getting hard to tell the difference between it day to day because it's now folding back in on itself. But I can see some significant changes in Ruth's. Her smaller one, that little plant started very small, and now it's grown up about halfway up the bottle. It looks like it's doing quite well. It seems green and it's not wilted. Looks like it's doing well. And on the far right here, the woodsy one from Ruth, that plant has flowered. So it's gone through a different part of its life cycle. It's grown a bit, and I guess it's established itself, and now it's flowering. It's trying to go into a reproductive stage instead of just the vegetative growth. Now, on our day 28, here is today's. And I'll bring you back live in just a second because I have them sitting here on my table, but let's take one close-up look. It might be easiest for you to see in these pictures. Mine is still looking very jungly. We're seeing evidence of the water cycle in all of them, and Ruth's plants look like they're doing great. The little one's getting even bigger, and the flowered one still has its flower. If you want to see them in front of me here, I'll try to hold them up for you to the camera. Here's Ruth's one that had a lot of water at the start. It was looking kind of swampy, but it looks like the moss is quite happy with that swampiness. I see all this little moss growth down at the bottom, and there's a little plant right in the center who hasn't grown a bunch, but I don't see any evidence that it's not happy. The leaves are all nice and green. And here's that tall one I was talking about, crawling up the side, looking like it's doing very well. Let's have a look at Ruth's other one. See if you can see that flower. Be difficult with all the condensation, but it's there on your side. It's sort of, I'm trying to remember the biology word for this. When a flower has a bunch of little miniature flowers inside it. But it's one of those flowers that has a bunch of little miniature flowers all together, kind of like a lupin. Let's have a look at Jen's. I didn't see too much in Jen's in the pictures. It just sort of looks like everything's doing pretty well here. This one's a little lighter, so I think there might be a little less water in it, but the moss seems happy enough. There's plenty of greenery on the moss, and there's a few leafy plants with healthy looking leaves, no browning. I don't see a pile of growth, but different species will respond differently. That's not a bad sign. And let's finish off with a closer look at mine. Let's see, my rose and my grass are they've either reached their max jungliness or they keep growing and it's difficult to tell the difference day to day. But down at the bottom, this is 2 weeks ago I was talking about the hitchhikers in the soil, that I was adding the soil as an abiotic factor, a non-living one. And I said, surely there's some microbial hitchhikers in there who would be acting as decomposers. But it looks like I got a bunch of seeds also, because I didn't intend to put this clover in, but there's a bunch of little clover sprouting at the bottom. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see that, but I can see them all over the bottom. I really like seeing clover because it has a useful property of being able to fix nitrogen, which is a rare ability to take nitrogen from the air and put it into the soil in a biologically useful form. Well, I think that is enough time now, so why don't I let everybody get to your feeder building, and I will see you back at 11. See you then. Welcome back, everyone. If you didn't see me before, I'm Adam from the Discovery Center. Today, we're analyzing seasonal changes and how they affect animal behavior, like bird migration. In order to help us study some animals, we made bird feeders, and Japna talked to you about bird watching like a scientist. In a few minutes, I'll share some of the birds that I've observed in my neighborhood and some of the decisions I might make with my feeder. But first, let's take a look at our viewer submissions. Here's our first one with all of the material set out. Let's have a look. There's a lot of production quality in this one. They actually put some background music in, but I figured I would cut it so I can comment on some things. I like the little purchase on this one. Going for a stand-up toilet paper tube, covering it with the nut butter. Looking good. They have their seeds in the back, and I see, there we go, a cardinal on it. I think these are the black oil sunflower seeds that Japna mentioned. Looking like we're getting good adherence. It's sticking to it well. Piling some more on. Lovely. I wonder what birds that will attract. you see the way that the birdseed was sold, it looks like it was already targeted for the type of birds that you'd like to see in your yard. So thank you very much for that submission. Let's go on to our next one here. The selfie is of a cat. So I think there's sort of another species at play here. The cat's also hoping to get some birds to show up. Here's another very organized one with all of the ingredients labeled. That one looks like it could have been human trail mix. Going for another toilet paper roll technique, rolling it in. Interesting different ingredients here. We see oats mixed in with the fruit and nuts, and now some apple slices. So whereas the other poster gave us like a single type for a single species, this seems like a very diverse one that might support a lot of different birds. And I have it hanging in a nice shady area under a tree. And the cat is ready to see what happens with this feeder. Well, thank you very much to both of you. It was interesting to see you use some of the same materials and then have some significant differences in the way that you put it together, and also the feed that you used, which will likely impact the birds that you see. It would be interesting to be able to follow up on this and see what birds that you've observed around your feeder. Let's go on to our next viewer.
So this is a hummingbird feeder, and the one up there is for like a bunch of type of birds for like to eat. And also we have one up here, which is for what is it for again? Normal birds.
What did you use to make it?
Peanut butter and bird food and paper and toilet paper.
Did you use craisins?
Yes. Toe. Yes.
Thank you so much, Seamus. I'm really happy that you showed both your own feeder and some commercial ones. And the commercial ones that you chose, they didn't have seeds in them or on them, right? Inside them, there was sugar water. So those are for hummingbirds and other birds that like to drink nectar from flowers. So we give them a sugary water to approximate their nectar. And this gives me a chance to talk about my birthday card here. This is from my aunt and uncle on the other side of the country, on Vancouver Island, and they've been bird watchers for my whole life, as long as I know. And they send me these beautiful cards with their own photography. And the timing on this is really nice because it's both of their birthdays and their wedding anniversary this week. And I've been thinking about them as I've been preparing for this program. So I want to thank you, Seamus, for bringing up the hummingbirds, and thank you, Catherine and Brian, for the birthday card with the hummingbird. That really came together unplanned. That is it for our viewer submissions. So now I have a question from our viewers. And you know, before the break, I always do a bit that's like, our whole team of educators will be here to answer your questions. Well, this question had a whole conversation going. There was 4 other educators besides me. I was here preparing, and they were talking back and forth about it. This question is, do other planets in our solar system also have seasons? And the answer is yes, but then there's a big conversation about it. So I'm going to try to summarize a little bit of it for you. So again, the simple answer is yes, but they might not be as obvious as they are on Earth. Mars, with its much longer orbit and longer year, also has kind of 4 seasons that we might recognize, but they're about 6 months long. They're much longer and slower. the changes can be kind of intense because I mentioned just briefly that axial tilt, that the planet's tilted over. Mars is tilted even further, so some of the seasonal changes can be even more dramatic. Neptune, much further out in the solar system, has very, very long years and therefore seasons. Its seasons are 40 years long. So if you were born in the late fall, on a human lifespan, you kind of live your whole life through the winter, way out in the solar system. It'd be very cold there. And then there was a big discussion about Mercury, because I think there's practically no axial tilt on Mercury, and it's so close to the sun that it gets so much energy. So there was a discussion around this. And what we ended up coming to is, from the space perspective, there's two big important things that affect the seasons: the axial tilt and the eccentricity of the orbit. That means how far away from being a circle the orbit is. A perfect circle would have zero eccentricity, and as it gets more and more squished into kind of an oval shape, it gets more and more eccentric. So that means at parts of the orbit, it's further away from the sun, and at other parts, the planet's closer. So to sum this all up, yes, there are seasonal changes on the other planets in our solar systems. They may be more or less dramatic than Earth, and therefore these kind of patterns that we're talking about noticing, you might be able to notice them very readily, or it might be difficult to notice them from our human perspective. Also, I think this is a useful time to say a lot of this season talk, and especially this 4 season, is a very temperate zone perspective. We're talking about our perspective here in Canada and in Nova Scotia, and we are right around the 45th. As you drive through, I think it's Stewiacke, they have the sign of the halfway between the North Pole and the equator. These kind of answers can definitely change about where you are on the planet. The Arctic doesn't really have these 4 seasons. They go from a period of dark, and then a transition period, and then a period of sun. So there's very important seasonal changes that happen in the Arctic, but they're in a way much more dramatic, and the transitions happen much more quickly than we'd see in this temperate zone. And then around the equator, where the tilt doesn't matter as much, you don't have nearly as dramatic changes in the day length, and you get less of this 4-season effect, and you might have like a wet season or a dry season or a monsoon season. So even on our own planet, our perception of the seasons can be quite different depending on where we are in terms of latitude, and then also just in terms of the geography around us. So it turns into a big question and a big answer. So I hope there was something interesting in there for you. Okay, let's see. We are done with that bit, and on to my birdwatching report. So here is my filled out report. And I'm sorry, I'm not the cleanest writer for you. Where's my pen? There we go. But I will talk you through it. I want to be honest with you here. I've faked this a little bit. I didn't sit out properly and take observations over a period of time. I've kind of condensed what I've been observing around my neighborhood to give a few things to talk about. So some of the I was thinking about the last few days where there were hot sunny days, and I've seen a few blue jays around. They're sometimes singular, they're sometimes in pairs, so there's about three-ish of them. They're beautiful and blue. I was watching one sitting next to my home office, hopping along the fence. I always like seeing blue jays. There's also some mourning doves around. Mourning doves have kind of the body shape of a pigeon, but they have this kind of lovely, pale, kind of cafe latte color to them. And they have this soft cooing voice. And you almost always see them in pairs. And I think they mate for life. I think they might be mating pairs. So I always find them kind of cute, kind of like a couple. I've also mentioned seagulls here, and I've done a squiggly 3, so about 3. I don't usually find seagulls on the ground around our place, but I'll often see them flying overhead. I maybe shouldn't have even said seagull, because we have a number of different gull species and the related terns around. If you've ever noticed, you might have seen small-looking seagulls, and then these giant ones. We have a few different species around, and they can eat different things and have different behaviors. So at my level of expertise and the distance of the gulls flying overhead, I'll just call them gulls. After that, crows. I have a question mark here, because while I was thinking about this last night, I could hear crows cawing in the distance, and they have that very distinctive caw, caw voice, but I didn't actually see them. So this is why it was sort of useful to fake this for you, because it gives you some ideas of some of the difficulties that you might have filling out a report. And you'd have to choose yourself. If you want it to be very precise, you only want to report birds that are at your feeder. Are they eating from your feeder? Are they just interacting with it? Or do you want to report any bird that you think you hear or see? Next are little chickadees, and I've done another squiggly 4. I often find chickadees difficult to count because they'll sort of land and then they'll kind of flit around and land somewhere else. So when there's a few of them, it can be hard to get a clean count as they come in and out of sight. Finally, I have my starlings. I've been watching this sort of gang of starlings who have been living around the neighborhood, and they're very interesting to watch because they're so vocal, they're very noisy, and they always seem like they're talking to each other. I was watching some out the front window on the lawn, and it's like they were all sort of doing their own thing and talking a bit, and then one got mad at another one and kind of yelled at him, and he backed off. It was very interesting behavior to watch the starlings. And I'm going to use thinking about the starlings to transition over to, oh, sorry, I meant to show you a picture of the starlings. I had Jepna's bird pictures here. These were, of course, the robin, who I saw a lot earlier in the spring, but haven't seen much around recently. Here's a yellow warbler, some of the songbirds that are around, but I didn't identify one when I was thinking about this. Here's my little chickadees that I like. And here is these guys. These guys are the starlings. You might have seen these around, and they're invasive. They aren't originally from North America. It's a European starling or a common starling, and they were brought over. So I'm going to use thinking about starlings to talk to you about the designs of these. These are Jepna's 2 ones here, and I was thinking about kind of modifying them. Where I have a bunch of starlings in the neighborhood, they seem to be doing very well, and they're invasive. And they're kind of aggressive too. And they're a little bigger than the songbirds, so that means they can kind of push them out when they compete with them. So I don't want to necessarily give them even more food artificially. So I was wondering about building kind of a little cage around this, maybe with chicken wire or something, and have a little hole that only smaller birds can get through. I'm thinking about, have you seen like the TV cartoon classic birdhouse, kind of made out of wood, a woodworking one that might have the little perch for the porch and a little hole. When you're building one of those, you can choose the diameter of that front door to kind of to support different birds, to encourage different birds to live in there. Because if it's too big, a little songbird won't want to move in because that means something else can come in and compete with them or mess up their nest. So if I was trying to build a birdhouse for, say, chickadees instead of starlings, I'd choose a size that's small enough to just let the chickadees in, but keep the starlings out. I was thinking about using that same logic to modify this feeder like this, to have only a little hole to let my little chickadees in, but keep those aggressive starlings out. I was thinking about the toilet paper rollers too. My parents back home, they back onto the woods, and they have just armies of squirrels around. And don't get me wrong, I love squirrels. They're so interesting to observe and to look at. But when you start encouraging animals to come around the house, some of them, we have problems with the way that we interact with them. They can chew wires and rip out insulation. And I actually, honestly, saw a squirrel chew through a water line. They're those new kind of high-density plastic water lines that you can feed much more easily than the old copper. And for whatever reason, this squirrel decided to chew through it, and we had the pressurized water squirting out inside the wall. So after that, we learned our lesson and tried to, even though we wanted to have our bird feeders, we wanted to make it kind of more difficult for the squirrels to be right around eating that. So something like this that could roll, I was thinking maybe even putting a wire through to make it roll more easily. And that way, if a squirrel comes down and tries to grab it, they might roll off. And that might be able to support the birds preferentially over the squirrels. So when you're choosing what species you want to support, there's a lot of considerations that you want to make sure that you aren't helping invasive species and that you're kind of, well, you're thinking about the way that they'll compete over these resources. Well, after having heard me talk about some considerations for bird feeders at my house or my parents', I want to ask you, what other environmental factors should we consider for bird watching? What factors might affect the birds that you observe around your feeder? For example, is there much human activity nearby? I think a week or two ago, we were talking to the neighbors across the street who had been doing a bunch of work around the house. And they did tons of work on an old house, but they wanted to touch the property as little as possible. They had these beautiful old apple trees, and they wanted to preserve as much of that. And then their neighbors backing onto them. The house wasn't, the yard wasn't maintained for a long time. I think it was sold recently. So they were half joking, but maybe not even half joking, about that yard being a bird sanctuary because everything was allowed to grow up. So they were a little bit worried after the sale that humans would come in and kind of humanize the place, cut things down, and make it for human use, and there'd be less to support birds. I would love to be able to make a thorny thicket. Usually think of thorns as being kind of difficult to deal with because they can hurt us, but because they can hurt big things, they're very important to support songbird populations. So I'd like to choose something like a wild rose or raspberry that would have some other nice benefits for the humans, but could also support songbird populations. They can go and hide inside the thicket of all the thorns and be safe. Well, as I begin to wrap up things for today, I want to give you some other things to think about. Today we started with a big idea, seasonal changes on our planet during a whole year. That's a lot of space and time. Then we focused right down to a specific thing, making observations of changes with the birds in your neighborhood in different seasons. Today, since you have your observational biologist hats on, I want to get you to think about other examples of seasonal change. Are there other animals who change their appearance or behavior with the seasons? I have one in mind that I've always liked seeing. Our local wild rabbits aren't actually rabbits, but are closely related hares. Snowshoe hares, to be precise. Do you know the seasonal change that they undergo? They change the color of their fur between a rusty brown in the summer to all white in the winter in order to camouflage into their habitat. I've always found it kind of funny when there's been an early melt or an early snowfall and their camouflage doesn't sync up with the current weather. Are there other animals that you can think of? Other animals that migrate or change their behavior with the seasons? Humans are an animal that changes their behavior with the seasons. We even have human snowbirds. That's our nickname for people who spend the warmer months in Canada and migrate to warmer climates in the south as the weather grows colder, just like some birds and butterflies. Japna gave you some other examples of seasonal human behavior in her introduction. I'm also thinking of the seasonal interaction between humans and other animals. Do you have anybody in your family who fishes seasonally? Someone who waits for the right time for the mackerel or Gaspereau run? Can you think of another hairy species that famously wait for fish to swim upstream in the spring? Here's my impression. You know what I'm talking about? I've only used animal examples so far, but what about plants? There are some big seasonal changes in plants. Deciduous trees, like maples and birch, grow and drop their leaves every year, only keeping them on when photosynthesis is most efficient in the warmer, brighter months. In the fall, they pull some of their pigments, their colors, from their leaves back into their trunks. This gives us our beautiful fall colors in our forests and affects our human behavior. We entice tourists from away with events like Celtic colors, and we decorate for days like Thanksgiving and Halloween using those fall colors. Now is the autumn of our program today. Do you know what I mean by that? I'm trying to use our human and cultural perceptions of the seasons to say that we've reached the end. Just as many things in nature come to rest in the fall and wait through the winter for the coming spring, I'm going to lay our Through the Seasons program to rest for the Discovery at Home Winter of the Weekend before the spring of our next episode on Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed the program and that it piqued your interest in making observations on the environment around you. Science doesn't end with class or a Discovery at Home episode. It's all around us and might be at its most fundamental and accessible when it comes to observing the wonder and beauty of life and the environment. So I'll leave you by saying, stay curious and keep making observations.